Hi and welcome back to another bullet journal plan with me video. I'm so excited to share this setup with you because today I'm setting up my monthly bullet journal spreads for April. This is actually my second spring inspired theme. My March setup was also spring themed, but I went with a more muted, earthy color palette. If you missed that one, I'll link the video at the top so you can check it out. But for April, I really wanted to brighten things up, and honestly, that's not something I often do. If you've been here for a while, you'll know that I usually lean towards cozy vintage themes with softer, more muted tones. I just love the cozy aesthetic. But I have to say this rainy season has felt endless. Yes, we've been getting more sunny days recently, but right as you start getting used to the sun and think it's all over, the gloomy, drizzly days return. Look, I love a rainy day as much as the next girl, but at the moment, I am so over it. I need something cheerful, something that'll instantly lift my mood every time I open my journal. And what better time than Easter month to add a little brightness? I mean, even if you don't celebrate Easter, there's just something about April that feels fresh and lively. The flowers are blooming and the air feels lighter. It just makes me want to shake off the winter blues and embrace all the colors. So as I was brainstorming this video, I remembered this super cute Easter washi tape set that 𝐸 sent me last year. I've been dying to use it again. Sadly, it's not available in their shop anymore, at least not at the moment. This setup got me thinking about how my journal style has changed over time. When I first started this channel back when my mom and my husband were my only subscribers, I was making watercolor paint with me videos. If you scroll back far enough, you can still find them on my channel. Warning, they are cringy. I'm talking bad lighting, bad video quality, and me just figuring things out as I went. But hey, we all have to start somewhere, right? I've always loved watercolor and I used to incorporate it into my bullet journal spreads all the time. But as I slowly transitioned into more of a junk journaling style, I kind of left it behind without even realizing it, and I miss it. So when Woomer reached out and offered to send me one of their watercolor sets to try, I knew it was the perfect opportunity to bring painting back into my journal. Lately, I've been wanting my monthly setups to feel more like mixed media journals, a blend of creativity and structure. Because for me, journaling isn't just about planning my life, it's also a space to express myself. When their adorable little pocket-sized paint set arrived, I was just so excited to dive in. In this next section of the video, I will be painting a little rabbit and a few other things. If you're not really interested in this process, you can use the timestamps and skip to the cover page setup. But if you do enjoy painting, let's get into it. So my first painting is a little rabbit inspired by a picture I found on Pinterest. After roughly sketching the rabbit in pencil, I started with a very light wash of the rose color. When working with watercolor, you don't actually have white paint, so if you want a lighter color, you need to create a more diluted mixture on your palette. This set comes with two little mixing palettes that fold out, which is perfect for mixing colors. For the shadowy areas, I'm avoiding black because shadows in real life aren't actually black. Instead, purple or blue usually work great for creating depth. So I'm using a very diluted lilac purple for this. You'll also notice that I use a tissue to blot some of the paint after placing it on the paper. This helps me control the color a little better. Not that you ever have total control with watercolor, which is honestly what makes it so fun to work with. Some watercolors have more pigment in them, and once you put the paint on the paper, it will almost stain the paper, which means that if you want to lift the paint with the tissue after applying the paint, you won't be able to lift it completely like you would with other watercolors, which isn't a bad thing at all, just a preference that some people have when working with watercolors. In this case, I noticed that the paint doesn't lift completely. So for the areas that I wanted to keep very light or even white, I made sure not to put paint there or heavily dilute the paint with water to keep it as light as possible. The biggest thing to learn about watercolor paint is that layers are everything. You never want to go in with a brush loaded with heavy pigment right away. Instead, build the layers gradually to create more depth and dimension in your painting. I noticed that these colors mix and blend very well without getting muddy. Between each layer, it's important to let the paint fully dry, either by waiting or speeding things up with a hairdryer. If you keep adding paint while the surface is wet, the colors will bleed into each other, which can sometimes create a muddy effect instead of clean, crisp layers. Most watercolor sets, including this one, come with basic primary and secondary colors. So if you need a specific shade, you'll have to mix it yourself. For example, I wanted a light brown for the rabbit, so I mixed a bit of oriental orange with just a tiny drop of Payne's gray to create a brown. Then dilute it with clean water to lighten it. Once I was happy with how the bunny turned out and it was fully dry, I loaded my brush with some rose color and added a bit of splatter, one of my favorite things to do with watercolor. It's such a simple touch, but it adds so much character to the piece. This video isn't sponsored, but 𝐏𝐴𝐚𝐻 did send me this pocket palette to try out, and so far I'm really liking it. It works great on watercolor paper, but later in this video we'll see how it holds up on the craft paper in my journal. Also, 𝐏𝐴𝐚𝐻 was kind enough to offer you all 20% off if you'd like to try this set for yourself. The discount link is in the description and will be valid for the next 30 days. So if you're interested, be sure to check it out. Once the rabbit was fully dry, I used my liner pen to add some details like little hairs around her body and to make her lashes, brows, and whiskers stand out. I also added some lining to the flower to help define the petals a little bit more. To finish it off, I'm using my white Jelly Roll pen for some highlights. Now for the cover page. I've cut out the rabbit painting and I'm layering it onto this textured paper I prepped earlier to create a Polaroid style effect. I love how this small detail gives the artwork a bit more of a finished, framed look instead of just sticking it straight onto the page. The texture also adds a bit of contrast, making the painting stand out more. To bring everything together, I'm adding some floral stickers around the Polaroid. I want the arrangement to feel balanced, but still natural, almost like the flowers are blooming around the Polaroid. Florals are one of my favorite elements to use because they instantly add softness and elegance, and they're perfect for capturing that fresh, vibrant energy of spring. This whole setup is really about embracing the season after months of gloomy weather. I just want my journal to feel bright and lively. And now for the test. How will the paint look on the craft paper? I decided to use a wet on wet technique and first add water to the area that I want the paint. Then add the paint to the water on the page and let it flow naturally. I think it works really well. The paint is pigmented enough that I don't have to load the page with too much paint. It didn't bleed through the page at all, and there was minimum buckling on the page. On my first page, next to the cover page, I'm adding a little mini calendar that I want to use for social media tracking to track on what days I post by adding a little dot on the date. At the bottom, I have a little Insta and YouTube tracker where I'll write my subs and follow count at the end of the month. Speaking of, if you haven't yet, please go and follow me on Instagram. I post more bullet journal and stationery content over there. Next up is my favorites page. I started with the same watercolor effect as the background, but I made sure to leave some open space for my favorites boxes. I love using watercolor like this because it creates such a soft, dreamy base without making the page feel too busy. To add a little more interest, I decided to use one of the flower paintings I did earlier and layer some extra ephemera around the empty areas. The watercolor in the background almost looks like colorful clouds, kind of like those moments at sunset when the sky turns into this crazy mix of pinks and purples. I love when that happens. Have you ever seen that before? It used to happen all the time in my hometown back in South Africa. And I always thought it was one of the most beautiful things. It's funny how little things like that sneak their way into your journaling without even realizing it. For the title of the page, I'm using this piece of ephemera, which ties in pretty nicely with the floral elements. Using this many flowers, I feel adds a little bit of whimsy without overwhelming the page. For my favorite trackers, I'm including the same categories as usual: games, reading, watching, and cooking. These are the things that I really love keeping track of each month because it's fun to look back and see what I was into at different times of the year. Sometimes I even notice little patterns, like how my reading choices shift with the season, or how I gravitate towards certain comfort foods when the weather changes. It's such a nice way to document not just what I'm enjoying, but also how my interests evolve over time. My next spread is my calendar page. Usually I keep the spread pretty bare and open, but this month I wanted to make a layered scrapbook layout. So I started with a bunch of different ephemera across both pages, keeping with the colorful pink and purple theme that wasn't really planned, but it just kind of happened. Luckily, I have quite a few purple ephemera in my collection that I can use. If you're curious about anything that I use in this setup today, I will do my best to link everything in the description down below. I've been finding it a little bit harder to remember where I got everything, but I do try. Some days I want my pages to be really decorative and expressive, and other times I just need them to be functional. But pages like this kind of feel like it's the best of both worlds. It's also fun to switch things up and experiment a little with the layouts of the pages, because most months I have the same spreads, but every month I try and find it a bit of a different layout. Obviously the theme changes each month, but finding a layout that's different helps keep everything fresh and so that I don't get too bored. Sometimes I'll go really minimal. Other times I'll add tons of layers. But no matter what, I love the process of creating something that reflects how I'm feeling that month. That's one of my favorite things about bullet journaling. It's so flexible and it always feels like my space to be creative in a way that works for me. For the calendar itself, I'm using white dot grid paper and sticking it on top of the layers. This month's calendar is much smaller than I usually make it, but it's still big enough for a short description of any event or holiday that I want to take note of. On the left of the calendar is my note to self card, where I'll write down some of my goals for the month. I have so many hobbies that I've started to pick one big hobby that I want to focus on, and then one smaller hobby to also do per month. Last month, my big goal was to learn crocheting. I recently started and I'm very much learning from scratch. So I am focusing on the very, very basics, like how to make a chain and a single crochet. I wouldn't say it's gotten any easier yet. I don't think I'll be doing any big projects anytime soon. What do you think is the best first project to try out once I get the hang of a single crochet? Now that all the elements are in place, I'm going back in with a bit more watercolor around the edges of the ephemera, just to blend everything together and give it more of a cohesive look. The Easter washi tape really makes sure that all of the spreads have an element of the theme without it being in your face, although I have to say this is probably the loudest theme I've done in a while. I made sure to wait for everything to fully dry before I continued with the page. Using watercolor paint can definitely make the process a little longer, but I use my hairdryer to help speed up the process. And I think that's it. I'm really happy with how this page turned out. The two last spreads in this journal are my habit tracker and my mood tracker. I was so excited to finally get my hands on this stamp set from Paper World. It's such a cool set with different calendar styles to choose from. And I think it's going to save me a lot of time in the future. I probably won't use it for every month. Still gotta make sure it fits the theme, of course, but for this one I thought it was perfect. So I'm stamping a few calendars onto some dot grid paper, and since I've already put double-sided tape on the back, they'll basically be little stickers when I cut them out and stick them in later. Next, I'm covering almost the entire first page with a wash of pink rose and lilac purple paint for the background of my habit tracker. I think these colors pop beautifully against the craft paper. While I have my paints out, I'm also painting the background of my mood tracker just to get all of the base layers done so everything can dry at the same time and I can move on to the next steps. Once the paint has fully dried, I can go in with my 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐾 brush pen to write the title of the spread. The background isn't too dark so the black lettering stands out nicely, and honestly I think it makes the heading pop even more. Now I can start adding the little calendar stickers to my habit tracker. If you're unfamiliar with a habit tracker, the way this works is simple. Each calendar represents a habit or a hobby that I want to track, like cleaning, crocheting, or reading. Every time I do that habit, I'll mark it on the calendar. This month I'm going to be using some purple markers to track my progress. Now on to the mood tracker. This month I wanted to do something a little different, a doodle style tracker, which I'll explain in a second. But first I'm writing the title just like before and sticking in these little 3x3 white squares I cut from a white dot grid sheet. These also have double-sided tape backing, making them super easy to place. At this point, I realized I wanted to add some Easter washi tape in the background before sticking down the rest of the squares. So I pulled out my little Easter bunny and egg themed washi tapes and layered them in. Speaking of eggs, we finally got some actual Easter candy in our local supermarket. This is the first time in all the years I've lived here that I've ever seen Easter chocolates like this. So you bet I was very excited. We grabbed a bunch of Cadbury and Kit Kat mini eggs, and I even tried my first Cadbury cream egg. Oh my gosh, it was so sweet, but it was so good. My husband, who isn't much of a sweet tooth, had one and said he probably won't have another. They are just so deadly sweet, but very yummy. I do miss the big hollow chocolate bunnies though. Those were always so much fun. If you're still watching, please leave me a little egg or bunny emoji in the comments so I know you made it to the end. I love knowing who sticks around for the whole video. Back to the mood tracker, I've drawn 4 little doodles in each corner that will represent my different moods. If I have a happy day, I'll draw a little rose. For really great days, I'll add a simple bunny. Chill, relaxed days will be marked with a flower, and if I'm feeling tired, I'll doodle a little butterfly. Finally, I'm finishing off the artwork with a liner pen. I wouldn't say this is my best bunny drawing ever, but hey, she's good enough. I hope you all have an amazing Easter, and don't forget to check out 𝐸𝐴𝑚𝑒 through the link in my description for 20% off if you're interested. And now here is my full flip through of my April setup. Happy Easter, and as always, I hope that you have a very crafty day.